Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Gorham, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Now, striking out on my own as an engagement and culture consultant and hosting this podcast has, I think, made me a little braver in going after things I think are important. Now, today's podcast guest, I think, is a fine example of that. I saw a post from him on LinkedIn that resonated with me on the topic of well-being and switching from an unlimited holiday policy to a minimum holiday rule. Now, what struck me first was it was really nice to see someone talking about what they'd actually done and the effect it was having. The piece struck me as something that was more than just a policy and benefit statement, and that it had a genuine, caring soul behind it. What then piqued my interest further was the way in which my guest responded to the queries, including some from those people who clearly hadn't read the post properly or were just trolling or trying to score some sort of imaginary points. It said to me that there was more behind what they were doing at this company than the headline of the piece. Now, there are a lot of people who talk about having a focus on people, engagement, and culture, but I think the thing that differentiates the best is a genuine commitment to doing these things and a strong belief that doing the right thing is not just good for the headlines, it's good for business. So today, I'm speaking with Tom Hollis, who's the Chief People Officer at Zappi, which started life as a tech startup 8 years ago, and is continuing its story of rapid growth as it provides a platform to help businesses and marketers test and put out better, more relevant content to its customers. The growth path has been exciting and challenging, but people have always been at the heart of it. And Tom's going to share with us the stories of success and failure the company's had so far and how it plans to continue its people focus as it grows and grows. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here.
Hey, really nice to have you here, my friend. Your story on LinkedIn really struck a chord with me. But before we get into all of that, do us a favor, mate, will you? You just give us a better introduction to you and what you do and what Zappi's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm Chief People Officer at Zappi. I've been working in the HR space for 3 or 4 years. And before that, I was actually working in product. So the early versions of the Zappi platform, I product managed, built the website, a few different apps that we use. And I was always kind of interested in team culture and, how can we build a kind of really people-centric, compassionate place to work as we scale, right? And so I was always getting myself involved in different things, whether that was, running focus groups, whether it was coaching or running surveys or these sorts of things, trying to understand different experiences and really understand what made people tick. And eventually we got to about 150 people and we didn't have any HR folk at that point. And we'd sort of made that decision consciously because we felt like, actually, do you know what, we're just doing really good work. And we felt like up to that point, it wasn't something that we necessarily needed. But we got to this point and we were like, we really need someone thinking full time about the end-to-end employee experience. And I would get really involved in a project and then have to dive back into some delivery or whatever it is. So it was a kind of natural sidestep from a lot of that team coaching, agile coaching stuff that I was doing to actually say, let's think about employee experience and actually can we apply some of those product development principles and ways of thinking to how we think about people and culture. So that's a bit about me. Before then, I was a social researcher and did a few different things. I've always been quite interested in what is it that makes people tick?
Yeah.
And as for Zappi, so we're, like you said, we're about eight or 9 years old. We've built a platform that allows marketers, creators, insights professionals who are coming up with new product ideas, ad campaigns, launching brands in new markets, all of that sort of thing, they can use our platform to gather data about it. And we've automated the process of how we capture consumer feedback and other data streams, and then how we aggregate that data and help our creators to derive meaning from it. So all of that programmatically. So it's a kind of data collection, visualization, generating insight platform, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, and that is for marketers now meat and drink, isn't it? If you don't have all that data kind of helping you educate your decisions, what are you doing? It's, back in my day, we used this thing called Gut, which was reliable on occasions, but let's be honest, it didn't always help us. And yeah, that moving into the whole world of data for marketers was a huge change when I sort of first started in marketing, but hugely beneficial.
Yeah,
I just want to pick up on that post, and if I'm clever and techie enough, talking to a techie kind of guy, to drop that link to that post in the show notes at the end, people can kind of see where we came from. But just where did that post come from, and what was the overall reaction like?
Yeah, definitely. So look, we've always taken this perspective of, if you really trust people, if you really trust people, you just assume good intent, that people are there to do their best work. You sort of don't need to put in lots of processes and policies and things. You need enough so that people, are able to be effective, and we can, you need a bit more as you grow and all these sorts of things. But there are some areas where if you really trust people, you can just give them a guiding principle and let them get on with it. And we've always taken that approach. And one of those areas is on, time off. So from when we started, when we were, a couple of people around a shared office desk, we always just said, right, we're not going to have a holiday policy in terms of counting the days that we take or anything like that. Just take whatever time you need to, just get the job done.
Yeah.
Right? We trust you to get the job done, take whatever time. Just chat to the people around you, chat to the people in your team, make sure that everyone can cover and all of that sort of stuff. And as we grew, that served us really well. And one of the things that you consistently hear is that people love that flexibility. And actually, I think the flexibility is one thing. I think it has huge impacts on all kinds of different things. And increasingly now people are realizing, from a diversity perspective, how important that is, that you can design your experience of work, when you work, how you work, where you work. So obviously, everyone's thinking about it a lot more since post-COVID. But we got to this point where, several years in, we were looking at it and saying, this has worked for us up until now, and it works really well for some people. I was looking at the data, and what I really saw was that, so we had this unlimited policy, take as much time as you need. I was looking at the data, and it was basically like a bell curve. Most people are taking the statutory amount for their region. There's a small group of people who are taking a fair bit more.
Yeah.
And there's a small group of people who are taking a fair bit less. And I was worried about those people taking a fair bit less. Because our intention with this approach is people are well rested. When they're at work, they're able to bring their whole selves, they're able to do their best work. And we make use of it. And there was a small group that weren't. So what we did is we looked at it and said, okay, well, if this is going to be the case, this isn't working for us. This isn't achieving what we set out to do. So the evolution of that was to say, let's switch to a minimum. Let's set it above statutory for the UK. So when you think actually, then we're, a third of our staff are in the US. That's a lot more generous than like most US companies. But set it just above UK statutory, and we've got some. We have some like mental health days and things as well, where everyone takes a day off, which are really brilliant as well. And then let's just leave it open-ended. And that's the kind of evolution of the policy. So we really wanted to just kind of keep. I think this goes to the core of how we try to work. And to go back to what I was talking about around product, is set a vision of what you're trying to achieve, and then just iterate. Just keep looking at the data and iterating, and think, how can we change or evolve this so it better meets where we're trying to go? And so really, that's the core of where that came from. And I had a bit of feedback from a few candidates who came in, and they said, you really didn't do a very good job of selling what it was going to be like to work here in the interview process. So to just be really honest, I thought, do you know what? I'm going to start talking about this stuff a little bit more and see where it goes. And it's been brilliant, actually, because I've had lots of really great conversations off the back of it. I've met lots of great people. I've learned a lot, actually, from what other people are doing as well. So it was 5 minutes very well spent on a Friday evening with a beer at the end of the day, just putting that up on LinkedIn.
Often those are the ways that it works, right? I think the interesting thing for me was it definitely felt like a genuine thing, which I really want to get into. But I would like to say I was surprised at some of the daft comments that also came on the back of your post. It just felt a bit, a bit LinkedIn-ish of people going, oh, well, we've always had an unlimited holiday, or that's rubbish. What a load of bunkum that is. And it just never fails to surprise me, the wallies that end up chiming in on this stuff for no real point. There's no real point to what they're saying other than you're wrong and I'm right. Get with me.
I think it's part of it, isn't it? And actually, I know what you're saying, but I also think there is a level of healthy skepticism. And I think if you're putting yourself out there to say, hey, we're doing something different,
yeah,
and we're trying to do something progressive, actually a little bit of people holding you to account and saying like, well, isn't that just, how is this different from just the normal or whatever it is, like engaging in that conversation is actually, at first I was a bit like, oh okay, I don't use social media. I opted out a few years ago,
right,
specifically because I just thought, actually, do you know what, there's other stuff I want to focus on in my life. So LinkedIn is the only one, and I use it for a work point of view. So I was like, oh god, okay, let's see where this goes. But it is what it is, and I think one of the things that I always try to hold really dear about Zappy in the way that we work is that we're not perfect, but we are honest, and we don't mind being held to account. And I'd apply that to our staff team. And if I'm going to put something out there as well, I'm happy for people to hold me to account on that as well.
No, look, and that's a very grown-up perspective on life. I'm far more reactive into things. I just thought people were being daft. But right, let's get into what you've been doing, because it's really refreshing to speak to people who are on the front line actually making this sort of stuff work. On the podcast, we talk to lots of people who consult on this stuff, or experts who give advice and all that kind of stuff. But it's always a joy to talk to people that are actually making it happen. I think what's interesting for me personally is I've got someone with me today who isn't traditionally having an HR background, has come from product, and we're going to talk about, I'm sure, the influence around how products come to market and the attitude and processes that you use in that area, and how you've applied that to the people and culture stuff. And from my perspective, as an old ex-brand marketing guy who now works in an area, let's be fair, that is traditionally handed over to HR, that culture people thing, that's HR's job, and having a different perspective. And I think it's the different perspectives that come into the mix that are interesting, right? I'm not saying you or I know any better than a traditional HR professional, but I think the different perspectives all come and you can kind of move forward in that perspective. So normally, when I've talked to guys from rapid growth startups, I mean, traditionally they're a pretty frenetic, exciting, slightly chaotic world where there's a founder at the center going, oh, this is my vision, this is where we're going, bash, bash, bash. And from my experience, culture and people usually take one of two forms. One, it's absolutely the be all and end all about it, and that's what we're going to build something around. Or secondly, we'll hardwire this culture stuff later on when we get to a certain size. Now, it seems to me from the outside that it was always at the core of the Zappy thought. Is that true? And how's that manifested itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you say, it's a lot about the founders, actually. And our founders, our CEO, Chief Technology Officer, a few of the other kind of core founders, always really prioritize culture. And because I've been there from the start as well, it's something that we've always worked on together. And there's been a number of different, I would say, over the years, sort of very influential ideas or books or things like that we've read, brought into the organization, and then kind of folded into our culture. So I would say that there's actually very little that we're doing that's completely unique.
Yeah.
And we always say, like, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We try to take on as many different ideas and just keep evolving based on whatever the context is at the time. But yeah, absolutely, I'd say, like, really kind of having the support of the founders of, to me, there's two core organizing principles, and other people in my organization probably say something different about these two, but the first is trust, and the second is compassion.
Right.
And I think actually, if you're holding those two spaces, everything else flows from that. And I think that's what our founders have done really well. And then that's enabled me and freed me up to be like, okay, how can we kind of forward that into all of our everyday and the ways that we work and all of those sorts of things.
I think they're two incredibly important words when it comes to the world of culture and engagement. 100%. They're almost core foundations, I think, of the whole thing. And if we think about two outputs that we want from a great culture, is a workforce that feels that they can turn up and be their best every day, and that want to stay with you, right? And acts as a tractor beam, bringing in other like-minded people. And if we think about the challenges that we face right now, there's a big piece in my heart that hopes you're going to say something positive about the following, but it would be my dream that focus on compassion and trust means that in the face of all the turmoil that we've had over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, even in a rapidly growing startup, that you are holding on to your people, and you are, in the face of the great resignation or big quit or whatever you want to call it, actually you're managing to hold on to your talent, and they feel like they're thriving in that environment. Please tell me that is what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone, but yeah, no, definitely. And actually, I think, I think there's a growing perspective that I'm hearing that of organizations looking around and saying, what great resignation.
Yeah.
Actually, and it's the organizations that are prioritizing those things and giving people, real flexibility, giving them autonomy, giving them, like, helping them to feel a sense of purpose, where there's values alignment, where they do feel like they can show up and be themselves. And also, like, you're paying them well. Like, let's be real. Like, it's a crazy competitive market, and salaries are going. So, like, if you don't get that right, that's table stakes. But
yeah,
that aside, like, I think, yeah, and if you look at us, we're, over the last few years, we have around 5% voluntary attrition. So people do tend to stay, and, like, we regularly, it's happened 3 times this year already where somebody's left and they've already come back. This year, where they go and try something else, come and realize, actually, what, I miss working there. So I think there's a lot of evidence to show that what we're doing is having a really positive impact. And I do think that sometimes, some people have a reaction to talking about things like compassion at work, the idea of compassion at work. But actually, I think organizations like ours show that there is it's a real bottom line issue. If you create a truly trustful, compassionate environment, you get the better out of people. People who are there can do better work, and people tend to stay, and it's easier to recruit people, and all of those sorts of things. When I think about compassion, again, you can think about it and think, it's a kind of, it means everyone being nice to each other, or it's it's like West Coast hippie crap. But actually, for me, compassion is about accountability. It's about taking accountability for yourself and the impact that you have on other people. It's about taking accountability for the experience that people have in your organization. And it's about taking accountability for addressing issues when you find them, And so for me, like, compassion isn't like this sort of soft, fluffy edge thing. It's actually saying, like, no, let's really treat people with the respect that all human beings deserve. And when you do that, you get real benefits from it.
100%. I mean, you're hitting all of my buttons today, Tom. I don't want to bore my audience going off on rants about these sorts of things, but, compassion's far, far, far from a fluffy thing. Care, empathy. I love adding accountability into that. That puts a harder edge onto these things. And actually, the human skills that we need in that sort of environment they're not easy. They're not natural to everyone. I mean, let's just pick up some of the words that you've used already on this show. Trust, treating people like adults, being human, taking a personal approach, using compassion. These are words that scare the bejesus out of most CEOs, right? It's changing, which is great, but these kind of amorphous people things, where I have to take a personal approach to everybody in my organization and work out what's best for them and how to adapt to them to get the best out of them. These can be scary things. But in a business like that you're talking about, you're using these to actually liberate the people inside the business rather than relate back to the old-fashioned command and control. You've got a set of tram lines that you must stick to. This is what we're doing. You're looking at the whole liberation of your workforce, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really interesting one. You kind of talked about scale as well, and I think that's like we've got one of those classic tensions that we've been working through. So we probably had, I'd say we probably had three different periods of
Yeah.
intense scaling. So when we went from, I don't know, 15, 20 people to about 70 or 80, then when we went up to 200, and then, in the last sort of 14 months or so, we've gone from 200 to 300 people, and we're preparing ourselves for the next one. So probably the fourth big kind of intense scaling exercise. And each one of those has brought a different set of tensions. And it's that classic thing of like, okay, how do we hold on to those intentions and those values while recognizing that as you do scale, you naturally get a bit more role specialization. You naturally need a little bit more process. I'm a big advocate. I call it, to go back to my product roots, I call it minimal viable policies.
Yeah.
So, what are the smallest subset of policies and processes that we need to do our best work, to be ourselves when we show up, to be as effective as we can, and also, to be compliant in how we work and all those sorts of things, but primarily to be effective and to be able to be ourselves. And that changes over time. And managing that tension where you have new employees coming in, existing employees harking back to how things were several years ago. Human beings, in my experience, we've got an unending ability to see the rosy side of the past and some of the dysfunctions of the present. We ignore the dysfunctions of the past, I think. So like managing that tension is one of the things that actually gets me out of bed every day, because I just think it's a super interesting problem to think about, and to sort of experiment with as we grow.
I think it's interesting listening to you about the stages of growth, because I think, that initial one, that sort of 50 to 70 sort of get to, is typically where companies make a decision to hardwire the culture stuff, or they don't. And I think it sounds to me like it was always there from the beginning. You're starting to hardwire it, in communication at that 50 to 70 point is massively different, right? That's when it really does start to change. What has been the kind of biggest area of tension and change that you've seen through those stages, that if you look back and you were doing this all over again, you'd know, right, that's the thing I've really got to get right from the beginning?
Do you know what? I think the first thing is that I would have put in place some of the ways of working and some of the thinking that we have now at our level of scale back then.
Right.
I think at that time we thought, oh, let's evolve slowly, and blah blah blah. But actually, the reality was that shift from pure startup, where everyone's doing everything and we're all working crazy hours and whatever it is, to okay, now we're a SME, small medium business. That was like the toughest transition of all of them, to be honest, because I read a great article a while ago from someone who'd been through that experience at Facebook, and it was all about the importance of giving your Lego bricks away. And if you don't give your Lego bricks away, you just end up burning out, and you end up with massive dysfunction in the organization. People get frustrated because they don't have an opportunity to take new things on.
So true.
And so that's where, like, if I were going to give myself some advice back then, it would be, how is everyone in this organization right now thinking about what Lego bricks they're going to give away over the next 6 to 12 months? And we didn't do that as well. And actually, I'll be really honest, like, I think that scaling, we made mistakes then, which loaded us with organizational debt and technical debt that we probably just about paid off now. And I'm talking like 6 years ago.
Right.
And it was because we scaled, and we knew where we wanted to get to, but we were just so focused on the doing that it was really, really hard to get there. And I think the intention of the culture was there during that time, but it got lost amongst the craziness, which is exactly what I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
It was probably when we got to about 150 people that we really started to take stock and think, like, this is not how we want to run this organization. And there was one book in particular called Reinventing Organizations by a guy called
Frederick Laloux.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, it's a case study of how organizations can operate with, he's got three things. So, like deep self-management, evolutionary purpose, so purpose that kind of bubbles up rather than comes top down, um, and bringing your whole self to work. And this case study of about 10 or 12 organizations that do this at scale. Because people often say, oh, these are nice things, you can't do them at scale. Well, that's just not true, because there are lots of organizations that do it.
Absolutely.
And you just need to find the model that works for you. And so that was there was a period of a good year or two where we really took those on board and started to kind of, starting from those principles, it gave us a sort of framework to say, oh, actually, there are different ways of approaching different things that we need to do, like compensation, like professional development, like how we do planning, like how we do reviews, all of these sorts of things. There are different ways of doing this that we can explore that sit really well with our principles. And then over the years since then, so over probably the last 5 years, as we've scaled, we've kind of just continued to borrow different ideas from different places and just sort of, the mechanics change, but the underlying, we want an organization where people are trusted. We want somewhere where we always try and get down to root causes and understand what's really going on. We want a compassionate place where we put people first and have a very person-centered approach to the way that we think about work. And then those mechanics in each of those different areas change based on the new people that you join, or like what the new context is, or, okay, now we've got an extra 150 people. How do we manage this new level of coordination that's required? Yeah.
And I guess, I think that's really interesting to hear. But from a product guy's perspective, right, you will probably be in that whole, I don't know, build, break, fix mentality of just kind of like, get stuff out. It's 60, 70% there. Let's have a look. Does it work? Right, what do we need to change? What do we need to do? And out of all of that craziness you've got, you would have made some fantastic decisions and some pretty suspect ones, I'm sure. So I was going to say I did. I'm just loving the honesty. So I'm just wondering whether, if you were to sort of look back and go, what's some of the crazy stuff that, from a product guy perspective, in the world of people that we brought to market and sounded great but didn't work? But conversely, what are the great things that have kind of emerged from that kind of process? And then how have you gone about making them stick?
Yeah. So I think the big one that really stands out is probably when we were about 150 people, we tried to do a big self-setting salary exercise. And
ambitious,
I think when I reflect back, the question that you need to ask yourself every time you're going to try and do something big and progressive and ambitious is, why are you doing this? Like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And is your approach really the best way to try and achieve that? What's this in service to? And I think if I think back, we were probably a little bit guilty of being like, oh, this is going to be an amazing progressive thing, and we can like do a study of it and and it's like, actually, how is this serving the people who work for us? And so what we did is we did it just with our product and engineering team. So it was about 80 or 90 people at the time, and we said to them, look, we really trust you. We want to our goal was to take money off the table as a consideration.
Yeah.
So we can just focus on the work and just focus on like everything else that we've got going on. Let's just take money off the table. And so what we did is we gave everyone, we said, right, here's like how the company's doing, here's some salary ranges, and a competency framework and everything like that. Go away, have a think, let us know how much you want to get paid.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was interesting. When people came back, and guess what? It was way over what we could afford.
You surprised me.
And I think the reality is that it can definitely work, but people need more support than we gave them.
Yeah,
right. Is the reality, and some indication of what's affordable and like more data than we had available to us. The principle is sound, right? You don't need to restrict important decisions to a small group of leaders if you trust everyone and they have enough data to make the right decisions. Right, and that might be data in terms of like financial data. It might be data in terms of feedback about what a career path looks like,
right,
or like how things are going for them, all these sorts of things. And we didn't give people enough data, and so we ended up looking at it and going, oh no, okay, this is unaffordable, and we ended up having to then go and talk to everyone and try and
You've got to
you know,
backtrack
try
from
and
that point. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, backtracking. It ended up being a very long and laborious process, and it ended up doing exactly the opposite of what we wanted, which was to take money off the table as a consideration. And you know, we sorted it out and we got there, and then afterwards we kind of evolved that approach year on year, and we said, actually, do you know what? Like, this could work. We could really lean into it, but is it in service of the people who work here?
Mm.
You know, who's it in service? What is it in service of? And so we've ended up at like a more traditional model where we try to have a continuous conversation with people about how things are going, and twice a year we sit down and we look and say, okay, well, like, here's a framework, here's how you map against it. We benchmark that to, you know, the 75th percentile, so we know we're really good payers and that sort of stuff, and we have a kind of a two-way discussion about how things are going and about performance and all that sort of stuff. And you know, it gives us it gives us a greater ability to ensure that there's pay equity and all of these sorts of things. And actually, you know, the freedom to choose your own salary, some people love that.
Yeah.
And for other people, it is terrifying.
I was going to say, scary thing.
It is terrifying. I mean, I would say, you know, it wasn't a complete failure. And actually, if I think back, of those sort of 90 people, after we had a round of conversations with everyone to sort of, you know, help them to better navigate the framework, and then we sort of said, okay, now can you have another go away and have another think and come back to us? At the end of it, there was only 5 or 6 people out of the 90 where we had to say, sorry, you're still going too high.
Yeah.
There were a couple of people who was like, you've asked me, I'm going for that.
Yeah.
And there were more people. There were more people who just said, I don't really want to engage with this, or like, just give me cost of living or whatever it is. And we had to say to them, no, that from an equity point of view, that's not right. We need to give you more.
Isn't that interesting? Really
yeah,
interesting.
so it was more of that than the other. But yeah, we've kind of evolved to something a little bit more traditional, but we still try and we try and create a space, a reflective space for people, and let them lead the conversation and let them lead that process, rather than us being like, oh, here's the budget for this year, this is the raise you're going to get.
Comes back to that trusted adults thing, doesn't it? That you've mentioned many times throughout this. And so, what's been the best thing, or had the most positive reaction, or perhaps the biggest benefit to people?
I think there's a few different things that stand out. So we've done quite a lot of work around diversity and inclusion and opening up opportunities for people to enter our industry who wouldn't usually have those opportunities. So personally, I'm quite proud of those things and the programs that we sponsor and that we mentor on. Both we're kind of sitting in 2 industries. So we sit within tech and engineering and product, but also within market research and insights and data. And each one of those industries has its own problems around diversity. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done in both of those areas to kind of open up opportunities to people, because I think when I think about, you know, we have our purpose as an organization, which is to help creators produce better work and produce better things for their customers. But we have another purpose, which is, you know, to really create meaningful, high quality, well paid employment, and to scale that, and to scale it to people who wouldn't necessarily have those opportunities.
Yeah.
So I feel really like proud whenever we're fulfilling that purpose. It's kind of my own personal purpose, but we've also like adopted it, I think, as an organization. And I think the other thing I would say is around coaching and what it means to take a coaching style. And by that, I mean, you know, the kind of Socratic questioning, incisive listening, like a very like non-directive style. And you know, we have a real diversity of people, so that's not everyone's natural style. But I think we've done quite a lot of work to equip people with the tools and the mindset to, you know, when the heat is on, not respond in a really directive way, but to respond in a kind of curious, emotionally intelligent way. And so when I see that coming through in the way that people show up at work, that gives me a lot of satisfaction, because I think it's one of those things where it's harder to pin down, because it's about creating those cultural building blocks. It's kind of about the skills that people have, but also the mindset and the emotional intelligence and all that sort of
100%, my friend. I think that whole coaching mindset nowadays is, with all the generational shifts we've seen in the last few years and what have you, I think that kind of autocratic, tell sort of style of management and leadership just bounces off people now. I think they're looking for a lot more support. And I think you end up building a lot more capability and muscle, getting people to think for themselves. And ultimately, a good coach can adapt to those situations. They're not there to answer the question for someone. They're there to kind of make them think about really what would they do differently? What would they build on? What would they continue to do? All those sort of really good things.
Yeah, definitely. And that's not to say that, we don't believe in being direct.
No.
And I think this again is something we use something called the advice process, which is again from borrowed from through the Frederick Laloux book, but from a company called AES and a guy called Dennis Backer who came up with this idea. And this is an energy company, tens of thousands of employees, US based but global. And he came up with this idea of saying, actually, why don't we devolve decision making by using this thing called the advice process? So anyone can make any decision. All you need to do is seek advice from everyone who's going to be impacted by your decision and some people who are experts who can help you make a better decision, right? And then you don't need approvals. You're empowered to make the decision. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier on. Trust people. If they have enough data, why do you need to restrict decision making to just a small group? Anyone can make those important decisions. And that's really like a founding principle that we've tried to adopt. And what's kind of interesting is some of the pushback you get around that is, oh, but it means we need to slow down, or but it means that we're kind of constantly looking for consensus, or we're trying to get everyone to agree. And that's not the intention at all. That's just to me, that's just a really good way of working. You're going to make a decision that's going to impact some people, maybe check with them first and understand their perspective. That's going to help you. Some experts who can help you make a better decision, people who really know that domain, it's going to help you, make a better decision. And so it doesn't mean that everyone needs to agree. It doesn't mean that we really need to slow down. It doesn't take long to actually seek advice from people. And if it's going to save you in the long run, it's a false economy not to do it at the start. And so, these sorts of things, it's easy to look at them and say, oh, we're trying to get everyone to agree, or, oh, we want a compassionate workplace. So it means that we want everyone to be nice to each other. It's like, no, that's not true at all. We want a direct, honest, but also compassionate workplace. The two are not contrary to each other.
No, that sounds like the Holy Grail, frankly. I mean, I think that's what we're all after. I think it's interesting to listen to you, and I could listen to you for a lot longer about this stuff. It's great to hear what people are really doing and seeing the effect. But if I was to sort of try and summarize what I think I'm hearing the benefits of this approach is that you've now got, to all intents and purposes, an embedded culture that allows people to show up and be their best. You're treating them with respect. You're treating them like adults. There's a high degree of care. You've used the word serve an awful lot when you've talked about today. So that whole kind of servant leadership is going. And I guess the upshot of that is you'll still continue to grow. As a company, you're successful. You're holding on to a higher degree of your talent. Retention doesn't sound like it's an issue for you. And I suspect the knock-ons of that are that you're also getting a reputation, which means you're pulling in the new talent that you need, who are aware of what's going on, are hearing from other people that they know or work with. And that whole kind of positive employer brand is working for you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And look, you're going to put me on the spot here because I'm also a realist. And like I said, I just want to be honest.
Yeah.
We have our own share of dysfunction.
Of
I wouldn't come on here and say that everything's perfect and that everyone is happy and all these sorts of things. But I think what we do very well is we're very principle led. We take an approach of continuous iterative improvement, and it's what I always say to my team, and it's the kind of culture that we've always tried to push is think about where you're trying to get to, and then every day just show up and iterate. And what's your feedback loop? Like, what data are you looking at? Where are you getting feedback from? How are you informing your decision making on a day-to-day basis? So every day we can just show up and try and do things better, in service of the people, and also aiming for that longer term vision that we're trying to achieve. And I think the other thing that just I personally value and I hear a lot from people is just that level of honesty. Like when we get something wrong, we put our hand up and we admit it. We're not at a size yet where we need to publish our gender pay gap, but we do, and we also publish our ethnicity pay gap because we think it's the right thing to do, and because we want to be honest about where there are areas that we think we need to improve. And that kind of mindset we just try to apply to everything, because then when I always think about it as like the trust bank. when you have a lot of credit in the trust bank, when you get it wrong, if you're honest, you know, you may be only running down that trust bank a little bit, and sometimes you're actually increasing the trust bank because people see, well, okay, right, that wasn't great, but at least they're trying.
That is so true, my friend. That is so true. And I am now going to put you on the spot because unbelievably time has run away with us. I have this part in the show we call Sticky Notes, where I'm looking to try and consolidate all the things that we've kind of talked about into 3 little takeaways. They could take those away and start getting benefit from the things that we've talked about today. So, Tom, what would your 3 sticky notes be?
I think the first is to legislate for the majority of people who care really passionately about making an impact and want to show up every day and do their good work, rather than legislating and creating rules to protect against the small minority of people that might abuse trust. I think that's the core fundamental that a lot of organizations get wrong. We've got it wrong in the past, but it's what we really try to focus on.
Love that.
I think the second thing I would say is, if you are working in a scaling organization, put as much effort into supporting your existing staff team as you do bringing on new people as you scale. And that idea of like giving your Lego bricks away and creating spaces for people to talk about what can be really tricky and challenging tensions that arise as you scale, and talk about how the culture's changing and all of those sorts of things. So put as much energy into your existing staff team as you do into bringing new people on. And then I think from a kind of broader point of view, I would always just say like approaching what's your long-term vision, what's your feedback loop. Those 2 questions are the questions that I just ask about every project that we have going on, everything that we're working on. What's our long-term vision? What are we really trying to achieve here? Okay, let's think about the initiatives. What's our feedback loop so we can show up every day and work better in service to our people towards that long-term vision? So I think if you're answering those 2 questions and you feel confident in it, you're never going to go far wrong.
Brilliant. 3 really high-quality Post-it notes there for people to kind of take away and learn from someone who's been there, who's not saying everything is rosy in the kitchen, but is saying, actually, our kitchen's pretty rosy. There's some mopping up to do every now and then, right? But it's
cleaning up. Yeah.
It's cleaning up, yeah. But it's people spill stuff. It's a good place to be. Tom, I know you're incredibly busy, and I say that to lots of people, but I do know you're incredibly busy and with a lot going on. So thank you so much for your time today. I've loved listening to your story, and thank you for sharing it with everybody.
Real pleasure. Thanks for having me, Andy.
No problem at all, my friend. You take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Well, that was Tom Hollis. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about him and a bit more about Zappy and any of the things that we talked about today, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forward. If you have, please like, comment and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Gorham, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.